Robert had always been the smartest person in the room. At least that's what everyone told him. And after 42 years of proving it over and over, he'd started to believe it himself. He worked at one of those fancy investment firms in the city, the kind with glass walls and expensive coffee machines on every floor. His job was simple on paper but complex in reality. He analyzed risks. He looked at companies, people, and situations, then told his bosses whether they should invest millions of dollars or walk away. And here's the thing that made Robert special. He was almost never wrong. His track record was legendary in the office. While other analysts sweated over spreadsheets and second-guessed themselves, Robert just knew. He could meet a CEO for 15 minutes and tell you if the company would succeed or fail. He could read a contract and spot the hidden problems that lawyers missed. His instincts were sharp, his mind was faster, and his confidence was unshakable. People at work had started calling him the fortune teller when they thought he couldn't hear. Some said it with respect. Others said it with a bit of jealousy in their voices. Robert didn't mind either way. He'd earned that reputation through years of being right when others were wrong. This confidence didn't just stay at the office. It followed him home, into his family life, into every decision he made. When his parents asked for advice about anything, they called Robert. When friends needed help with major life choices, they turned to Robert. He'd become the person everyone relied on to see what they couldn't see, to know what they didn't know. Robert's younger sister, Amy, was different from him in almost every way. Where he was analytical and careful, she was warm and spontaneous. Where he trusted his head, she trusted her heart. They'd always been close despite their differences. She looked up to him, especially after their father passed away 5 years ago. Robert had become not just her brother but her protector, her guide, the person she turned to when life got complicated. So when Amy called him one Tuesday evening, excited and nervous at the same time, Robert smiled before she even said what she was calling about. He could hear it in her voice. Something big had happened. "I want you to meet someone," she said, and Robert could practically hear her blushing through the phone. "His name is Tom, and he's really special. I think you're going to love him." Robert felt that familiar protective instinct kick in. Amy had dated before, but she'd never sounded quite like this. "How long have you been seeing him?" he asked. 3 months, she admitted. "I know I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to be sure first." "And I am sure, Robert. I really am. Can you come to dinner on Saturday, please? I really want you two to meet." Saturday came and Robert arrived at their mother's house where the dinner was being held. His mother had cooked enough food for 10 people, the way she always did when the family got together. Amy was in the kitchen helping, and she kept glancing at the door every few minutes, waiting for Tom to arrive. When Tom finally walked in, Robert stood up to shake his hand and began his assessment. It was automatic now, like breathing. He couldn't turn it off even if he wanted to. Tom was 35, well-dressed in a casual but expensive-looking way. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. He made eye contact. He smiled easily. He brought wine and flowers, which showed thoughtfulness. So far, so good. But then the conversation started and Robert's internal alarm bells began ringing. Tom talked about his work in a way that seemed deliberately vague. He called himself a business consultant, but never quite explained what that meant. When Robert asked specific questions about his clients or his projects, Tom's answers danced around the details. He was charming about it, redirecting the conversation with a joke or a compliment, but Robert noticed. Then there were the stories. Tom had lived in 4 different cities in the past 10 years. He'd started 3 different businesses. He talked about opportunities and ventures and partnerships, but nothing concrete, nothing you could actually verify. His social media presence, which Robert had quietly checked before dinner, showed an interesting pattern. Lots of photos at nice restaurants and events, but very few posts about actual work or achievements. Robert watched his sister hang on Tom's every word. He saw how she laughed at his jokes, how she touched his arm when she talked to him, how she looked at him like he'd hung the moon in the sky just for her. And with every passing minute, Robert's concern grew heavier in his chest. After dinner, Tom went outside to take a phone call. Robert caught his sister alone in the kitchen. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Amy turned around and her smile faded when she saw his face. "You don't like him." "I didn't say that. You don't have to. I can see it all over your face." Her voice had an edge to it, defensive already. Robert chose his words carefully. I just think we should slow down here. How much do you really know about him? I know everything I need to know. He's kind, he's honest, he makes me happy. But what does he actually do for work? Where does his money come from? Why has he moved around so much? Amy crossed her arms. He's explained all of that. He's had some hard times, yes, but he's rebuilding. Not everyone has a perfect career path like yours, Robert. I'm not saying his career needs to be perfect. I'm saying something doesn't add up. The vagueness, the gaps, the way he avoids direct questions. I've seen this before in my work. These are red flags. Red flags? Amy's voice rose slightly. You've known him for 3 hours and you're already picking him apart like he's one of your business deals? I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? From someone who actually cares about me? Their mother appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension. Tom came back inside a moment later, and the rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable politeness. When everyone left, Robert drove home with a knot in his stomach. He'd seen the hurt in Amy's eyes when he questioned her judgment. But he'd also seen something else that worried him even more. She was defensive. She was making excuses. She was too invested to see clearly. And Robert knew, with the same certainty that had guided every major decision in his life, that Tom was not who he appeared to be. The evidence was all there if you knew how to look. And Robert always knew how to look. He would protect his sister even if she didn't want to be protected. Even if it meant she'd be angry with him for a while. Because that's what you did for the people you loved. You told them the truth, even when they didn't want to hear it, especially when they didn't want to hear it. Robert had never been wrong about people before. And he wasn't wrong now. He was sure of it. Robert couldn't let it go. The more he thought about Tom, the more convinced he became that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just big brother worry or overprotectiveness. This was his instinct. The same instinct that had saved his company millions of dollars over the years, screaming at him that danger was ahead. The Monday after that dinner, Robert sat at his desk unable to focus on work. His mind kept returning to the conversation, to Tom's vague answers, to the way Amy had defended him so quickly. By lunchtime, he'd made a decision. If Amy wouldn't ask the hard questions, he would find the answers himself. He started with the basics. A simple online search of Tom's name brought up a LinkedIn profile, a Facebook page, and a few other scattered mentions. Nothing unusual at first glance. But Robert knew how to dig deeper. He spent his lunch break going through public records, business registrations, court documents. Anything that might tell him who Tom really was. What he found made his stomach turn. Tom had filed for bankruptcy 6 years ago. The amount was significant, over $200,000. There were 3 failed business ventures in the public records, each one shutting down within a year or two of opening. His employment history had gaps, sometimes 6 months or more where there was no record of him working anywhere. Robert printed everything out. He organized it into a folder, the way he would prepare a presentation for work. Facts, dates, documents, evidence that couldn't be argued with. That evening he called Amy. We need to talk. Can you come over? If this is about Tom again, please. Just give me an hour. Look at what I found, and if you still feel the same way after, I'll never bring it up again. She came over, but the moment she walked through his door, Robert could see her walls were already up. She sat on his couch with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. He laid out the documents one by one. The bankruptcy papers, the failed businesses, the employment gaps. He explained each one carefully, professionally, the way he would present a risk analysis to his bosses. This man has a pattern, Robert said. He starts things and they fall apart. He gets in over his head financially. And look at the timing. Every time things go wrong, he moves to a new city and starts over. That's not bad luck, Amy. That's a pattern of behavior. Amy stared at the papers spread across the coffee table. For a moment, Robert thought he was getting through to her. But when she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears of anger, not understanding. You hired someone to investigate him? You actually paid money to dig into his past? I didn't hire anyone. This is all public record. Anyone can find this, but anyone didn't look for it. You did, my own brother. She stood up, shaking her head. Do you know how this makes me feel? Like I'm too stupid to make my own decisions. Like I need you to vet every person who comes into my life. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, Robert? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you can't stand the fact that I might actually be happy with someone you didn't approve first. He's hiding something. Can't you see that? Amy grabbed her purse. You know what I see? I see someone who's been through hard times and came out the other side. His daughter died, Robert. His little girl had cancer, and the medical bills destroyed him financially. The businesses failed because he was trying to survive after losing everything that mattered. And yes, he moved around because sometimes when everything reminds you of what you lost, you need to start fresh somewhere new. Robert felt like he'd been slapped. His daughter? Yeah, something you would have known if you'd bothered to actually talk to him instead of running background checks like he's some kind of criminal. She headed for the door, then turned back. Tom told me about all of this on our second date. He was honest and open because that's who he is. The only person being secretive here is you. The door closed behind her and Robert sat alone in his apartment, staring at the documents scattered across his table. He picked up the bankruptcy filing and looked at it more carefully this time. There, in the details he'd skimmed past, were the medical debts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in hospital bills. But that didn't change the other facts, he told himself. The pattern was still there. People who'd been through tragedy could still be dangerous. Maybe even more so. Over the next few weeks, Robert became obsessed. He couldn't help himself. He looked up Tom's ex-wife and found her social media. She'd remarried and seemed happy. No bitter posts about Tom, no red flags there. He found articles about the charity events Tom had mentioned and verified that yes, he'd actually been involved in organizing them. Every piece of information was like a puzzle piece. But Robert couldn't make them fit the picture he was certain was there. So he kept looking, kept digging, convinced that eventually he'd find the proof he needed. He brought his findings to their mother during one of their weekly dinners. His mother listened patiently as Robert laid out his concerns. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to say?" she finally asked. "I want you to help me make Amy see reason. She's making a huge mistake." His mother sighed and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Robert, do you remember when you wanted to quit your first job and move to the city? You were 25 and you wanted to work for a startup that no one had heard of. That's different. Your father told you it was a terrible idea. He had all the statistics about startup failure rates. He showed you the numbers just like you're showing me these papers now, and you were so angry at him because you felt like he didn't trust you. But I was right. That job launched my career. Yes, you were. And your father was wrong even though all his data said otherwise." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes being smart means knowing that you don't know everything. That maybe, just maybe, your sister can see something in Tom that isn't on paper." Robert pulled his hand back. "So you're taking her side?" "There are no sides, sweetheart. There's just a family, and right now we're tearing ourselves apart over this." But Robert couldn't see it that way. To him, this wasn't about sides or family drama. This was about right and wrong, about protecting someone he loved from a mistake that could ruin her life. A week later, Amy called to tell him that she and Tom were moving in together. Robert's response was immediate and firm. "If you do this, you're choosing him over this family. Over me. Over everything we've built together." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Then I guess I'm choosing him," Amy said quietly. And the call ended. She stopped answering his texts. She didn't come to Sunday dinners anymore. Their mother tried to stay neutral, but Robert could tell she was disappointed in him even if she didn't say it out loud. At night, lying awake in his bed, Robert told himself he'd done the right thing. Amy would realize it eventually. She'd come back and thank him for trying to save her from disaster. He just had to wait. He'd been right about everything else in his life. He had to be right about this too. He couldn't afford to be wrong. 6 months passed like a slow blur. Robert threw himself into work, telling himself that staying busy would make everything easier. He took on extra projects, worked late into the night, and volunteered for assignments that other analysts avoided. His colleagues noticed the change but didn't ask questions. Robert had always been intense, but now there was something almost desperate about the way he worked. At home, the silence was deafening. No more weekly calls with Amy. No more text messages about random things that made her laugh. Their mother still called him every Sunday, but the conversations were careful and strained. She'd mention Amy occasionally, small updates that felt like pulling teeth. Amy was doing well. Amy seemed happy. Amy sent her love. Robert never asked for more details. He told himself he didn't want to know. But late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he'd find himself scrolling through Amy's social media. She'd blocked him, but he could still see her profile picture. In it, she was smiling wider than he'd seen in years. He'd stare at that photo and feel something twist in his chest. Was it concern, regret? He couldn't tell anymore. Work became his refuge, the one place where his judgment was still trusted, where he was still the person everyone turned to for answers. Until the morning, everything fell apart. It started with an emergency meeting. Robert's boss called him in early, before most people had even arrived at the office. The moment Robert walked into the conference room and saw the faces waiting for him, he knew something was terribly wrong. "Sit down," his boss said, and Robert noticed he wouldn't make eye contact. For the past 18 months, Robert had been championing a major investment deal. A tech company called Next Trend Solutions had approached them looking for venture capital. Robert had done what he always did. He analyzed everything, reviewed their financials, interviewed their executives, and dug into their business model. He'd found some concerns, sure, but nothing that seemed like a deal breaker. The CEO had some past business failures, but Robert had seen the pivot strategy and believed in it. He'd presented his analysis to the partners with his usual confidence. His track record spoke for itself. If Robert said it was a good investment, it was a good investment. They'd put in $12 million based on his recommendation. Now sitting in that conference room, Robert learned that Next Trend Solutions had collapsed overnight. The CEO had been running a sophisticated fraud scheme, hiding debts and inflating revenue numbers. But here was the part that made Robert's blood run cold. The warning signs had been there all along, signs that other analysts had flagged and that Robert had dismissed. "How did you miss this?" his boss asked, and it wasn't accusatory. It was genuinely confused. "You of all people, you never miss things like this." Robert stared at the documents spread across the table. Bank statements, email chains, evidence of fraud that should have been obvious to someone with his experience. And suddenly he saw what had happened. He'd been so focused on the CEO's past failures, so convinced that he could spot the pattern of a failing businessman, that he'd completely missed the pattern of a con artist. He'd been looking for the wrong red flags. He'd dismissed the concerns of junior analysts because he was certain he knew better. His confidence had blinded him to the truth. The meeting ended with Robert essentially suspended pending a full review. He walked out of the office in a daze, his mind spinning. For the first time in his career, his judgment had catastrophically failed. $12 million gone because he'd been so sure he was right. He drove home on autopilot and sat in his apartment for hours just staring at the wall. The failure at work was devastating, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the thought that kept hammering in his brain, over and over, relentless and terrifying. If he could be this wrong about something in his area of expertise, something he'd spent months analyzing, what did that mean about Tom? Robert got up and walked to his desk, pulling out the folder he'd compiled 6 months ago. He opened it and looked at the documents with fresh eyes. The bankruptcy after medical bills. The failed businesses during one of the worst recessions in history. The employment gaps during a period of grief. He picked up his phone and did something he should have done months ago. He actually researched Tom's charity work instead of just verifying it existed. What he found made him feel sick. Tom had spent the last 5 years volunteering at children's hospitals, organizing fundraisers, supporting families going through what he'd gone through. There were photos of him at events, testimonials from grateful parents, articles about the money he'd helped raise. This wasn't someone trying to look good. This was someone who'd taken the worst experience of his life and turned it into something meaningful. Robert found an interview Tom had done with a local newspaper. In it, Tom talked about his daughter, about losing everything, about having to start over from nothing. He talked about the shame of bankruptcy, about how hard it was to be honest about failure in a world that only wanted to hear success stories. "I learned that your worst moments don't define you," Tom had said in the interview. "How you respond to them does. I could have let the grief and the debt destroy me. Instead, I decided to help other families so they wouldn't have to face what I faced alone." Robert closed his laptop and put his head in his hands. He thought about the Next Trend CEO, smooth and polished, hiding fraud behind confident presentations. Then he thought about Tom, humble and vague, hiding pain behind careful words. He'd been so certain he could tell the difference. He'd been so sure he knew which one was dangerous. He'd been completely wrong. That evening, Robert saw a notification on his phone. Someone had tagged their mother in a post. Against his better judgment, he clicked on it. It was Amy's profile, public for once instead of private. The post was a photo of her and Tom, her hand extended toward the camera, a ring glinting on her finger. He asked, "I said yes," the caption read. "To the man who taught me that it's okay to start over, that past pain doesn't determine future happiness. I can't wait to spend my life with you." The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. Their mother had written, "So happy for you both." Even their uncle and cousins had chimed in with excitement. Robert sat there holding his phone, reading and rereading that caption. Every word felt like a small knife. Amy was getting married and he wasn't going to be there. She'd found happiness and he'd done everything in his power to take it away from her. His career was in shambles. His relationship with his sister was destroyed. And the foundation of his entire identity, the belief that his judgment was infallible, had cracked down the middle. For 42 years, Robert had been right about almost everything. He'd built his life on that certainty, that confidence. He'd never had to question himself, never had to sit with the uncomfortable feeling of being wrong. Now, sitting alone in his apartment with that engagement photo glowing on his screen, Robert finally understood something that terrified him. Being smart wasn't the same as being wise. Knowing facts wasn't the same as understanding people. And confidence, the thing he'd always thought was his greatest strength, had actually been his biggest weakness. He'd been so afraid of Amy making a mistake that he'd made an irreversible one himself. And unlike a bad investment, this wasn't something he could analyze his way out of. The damage was done. Robert spent the next 3 days doing something he'd never really done before. He sat with his mistakes, not analyzing them, not trying to fix them, just sitting with the heavy, uncomfortable weight of being completely and utterly wrong. The company put him on administrative leave while they sorted out the next trend disaster. He should have been panicking about his career, about the investigation, about what this meant for his future. Instead, all he could think about was that engagement photo and the look of pure happiness on Amy's face. On the 4th day, he made a decision. He couldn't undo what had happened at work, at least not yet. But maybe, just maybe, he could try to fix what he'd broken with his sister. He started writing her a message on his phone, then deleted it. Too casual. He opened his laptop to write an email, then closed it. Too impersonal. Finally, he went to the store and bought real stationery, the nice kind with heavy paper that his mother used to use for thank you notes. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. He sat at his kitchen table with a pen in his hand and a blank page in front of him. For someone who'd spent his whole career writing reports and analyses, he'd never struggled with words like this. How do you apologize for almost ruining someone's life? How do you admit you were wrong when being right was the only thing you knew how to be? He started writing, stopped, crumpled the paper, started again. It took him 6 attempts before he got it right. No excuses. No explanations that were really just more excuses in disguise. Just the truth, plain and simple. Amy, I was wrong about Tom. I was wrong about everything. I let my need to be right become more important than your happiness, and I'm so sorry. You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to respond to this. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did and I see what I cost us both. I'm happy you found someone who loves you the way you deserve. Congratulations on your engagement. Love, Robert. He addressed the envelope, put a stamp on it, and walked to the mailbox before he could change his mind. The moment it dropped through the slot, he felt a mix of relief and terror. There was no taking it back now. Weeks passed. No response from Amy. Robert tried not to check the mail every day like a desperate teenager, but he did anyway. Nothing. Meanwhile, the investigation at work continued. Robert had to sit through meetings with lawyers and executives, explaining his analysis process, showing his work, defending decisions he could no longer defend even to himself. The conclusion was surprisingly merciful. Yes, he'd made a massive error in judgment, but the fraud had been sophisticated enough that the company bore some responsibility too. They didn't fire him, but they demoted him. No more big deals, no more final say on major investments. He'd be working under supervision now, his analysis double-checked by others. The old Robert would have been humiliated, would have quit rather than accept such a blow to his pride. But something had shifted in him. He accepted the demotion and went back to work with his head down and his mouth shut. And something strange happened. Without the pressure of always being right, without the weight of everyone's expectations, Robert started actually learning again. He asked questions instead of assuming he knew the answers. He listened to junior analysts instead of dismissing their concerns. He admitted when he was uncertain instead of hiding behind confidence his colleagues noticed. The whispers of the fortune teller stopped. Instead, people started actually talking to him, coming to him not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to think through problems together. One afternoon, about 2 months after he'd sent the letter, Robert's mother called. "Can you come over for dinner tonight?" she asked. "Sure, is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Amy will be there." Robert's heart jumped into his throat. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." "I don't want to make her uncomfortable. She knows you're coming. She asked me to invite you." That evening, Robert stood outside his mother's house for a full 5 minutes before he could make himself knock on the door. His palms were sweating like he was a kid again, about to get in trouble for breaking something valuable. His mother opened the door and hugged him tight. "Be patient," she whispered in his ear. "And be honest." Amy was in the living room. She looked good, healthier than the last time he'd seen her. Tom was there too, sitting on the couch, and Robert's first instinct was to feel that old defensiveness rise up. But he pushed it down and walked over. "Hi," Robert said, and his voice came out smaller than he intended. "Hi," Amy replied. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't glaring either. It was neutral, careful. Tom stood up and extended his hand. "Good to see you again." Robert shook it, and this time he actually looked at Tom instead of looking for flaws. He saw the kindness in his eyes, the way he stood slightly closer to Amy like he was ready to support her if she needed it. Not controlling, just present. "Congratulations on the engagement," Robert said. "I meant what I wrote in my letter." "I'm happy for you both," Tom nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." Dinner was awkward at first. Their mother tried too hard to keep conversation flowing, asking about work and the weather and anything neutral. But gradually, slowly, the tension started to ease. Tom told a funny story about a mishap at one of his charity events. Amy laughed, and the sound of it made Robert realize how much he'd missed hearing his sister laugh. After dinner, Amy asked Robert to step outside with her. They stood on the porch in the cool evening air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I got your letter," Amy finally said. "I wasn't sure if you did. You didn't respond. I needed time to think about it, to decide if I believed you." She looked at him directly. "Do you really understand what you did? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" Robert took a breath. "I destroyed something between us because I couldn't admit I might be wrong. I was so convinced I was protecting you that I never stopped to think about what you actually needed, which was for your brother to trust you, to support you, to be happy for you. Instead, I made it all about me being right." Amy's eyes were shiny with tears. "You really hurt me. You made me feel like you thought I was stupid, like I couldn't be trusted to know my own heart." "I know, and I'm so sorry. Tom wanted to talk to you so many times. He tried to explain, to help you understand, but you wouldn't even give him a chance." "I should have listened. To both of you." Amy wiped her eyes. "Mom told me what happened at work. About the investment thing." Robert nodded. "Turns out I'm not as good at reading people as I thought I was. That must have been hard for you. Your whole identity was wrapped up in always being right. It was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it made me realize that I'd rather be wrong and have you in my life than be right and lose you." Amy was quiet for a moment. "I'm still hurt. This isn't just fixed because you wrote a nice letter. I know, but I miss my brother, and I'd like to try to find our way back to each other, if you're willing to actually work at it." Robert felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight for months. "I'm willing. Whatever it takes." Amy gave him a small smile. "Tom and I are getting married in 6 months. I'd like you to be there, but you have to really be there, Robert. Not judging, not analyzing, just there as my brother who's happy for me. I will be. I promise." She reached out and squeezed his hand, and in that simple gesture, Robert felt the first real hope he'd had in a long time. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The 6 months that followed were not easy. Robert had hoped that after their conversation on the porch, things would somehow snap back to normal. That he and Amy would pick up where they left off, laughing and talking like the lost time had never happened. But healing doesn't work that way. Amy responded to his texts now, but her replies were brief and careful. When they met for coffee twice over those months, the conversations felt like they were walking on ice, testing each step before putting their full weight down. She'd tell him about wedding plans, but only the surface details, the colors she'd chosen, the venue they'd booked. Nothing deeper, nothing that really let him back into her life. Robert learned to be patient in a way he'd never had to be before. He learned to show up without expectations, to give without demanding anything in return. It was harder than any analysis he'd ever done at work. At the office, his transformation continued. The demotion that should have ended his career somehow gave him a second chance at it. Without the pressure of being the fortune teller, without everyone watching him for the right answer, Robert discovered he actually enjoyed the work again. He found himself mentoring younger analysts, teaching them not just how to read data, but how to question their own assumptions. One of the junior analysts, a woman named Kelly who'd been too nervous to speak up before, started coming to him with her observations. She'd been the one who'd flagged concerns about Next Trend that Robert had dismissed. Now he listened to her carefully, asked her questions, valued her perspective. "You're different," she told him one afternoon. "I mean, in a good way. You actually hear what people are saying now." Robert smiled. "I'm learning that being smart means knowing how much you don't know." His boss noticed too. 3 months after the demotion, he called Robert into his office. Robert's stomach dropped, worried it was bad news. Instead, his boss offered him a new role. Not his old position back, but something different. Leading a team, teaching his approach to risk analysis, focusing on building better systems instead of being the sole decision maker. "You've done something I've never seen before," his boss said. "You took a massive failure and actually learned from it. That's rare. Most people just try to prove the failure wasn't their fault." Robert accepted the role, and for the first time in his career, he felt like he was doing something meaningful instead of just being right. The wedding date approached. Robert received his invitation in the mail, a beautiful card with elegant lettering. His name was written in Amy's handwriting. Just Robert, no +1, no special designation. But he was invited, and that was more than he'd hoped for 6 months ago. He went shopping for a gift, something that took him 3 different stores and an embarrassing amount of indecision. He finally settled on a set of kitchen items they'd registered for, and a handwritten card expressing his genuine happiness for them. The night before the wedding, there was a rehearsal dinner. Robert almost didn't go, worried about intruding on the intimate family gathering. But his mother insisted, and when he arrived at the restaurant, Amy actually smiled when she saw him. A real smile, not the careful ones she'd been giving him. Tom's family was there, warm and welcoming. His parents, his sister, a handful of close friends. Robert found himself sitting next to Tom's father, a retired teacher who told stories about Tom growing up, about the kind of kid he'd been. Thoughtful, sometimes too sensitive for his own good. Someone who felt things deeply. "He went through hell when we lost our granddaughter," Tom's father said quietly. "We didn't know if he'd come back from that. But he did slowly. And when he met Amy, it was like watching someone remember how to be happy again." Robert felt emotion tighten in his throat. "She's lucky to have him. They're lucky to have each other. And Tom knows you were just trying to protect your sister. He doesn't hold it against you." Robert looked across the table at Tom, who was laughing at something Amy had said, his hand resting gently on her back. "He should. I was awful to him. Maybe. But he understands that love makes us do desperate things sometimes, even when we're wrong about how to show it." The wedding day was beautiful. Clear skies, perfect temperature, the kind of day that felt like a blessing. Robert arrived early and sat toward the back of the venue, a small garden with white chairs and flowers everywhere. He watched the guests arrive, saw the happiness on everyone's faces, and felt grateful just to be there. When the ceremony started and Amy walked down the aisle, Robert had to fight to keep his composure. She looked radiant, glowing in a way he'd never seen before. And when she reached the front and took Tom's hands, the look that passed between them made Robert understand, finally and completely, that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. During the vows, Tom's voice cracked with emotion. "You taught me that it's okay to hope again, to believe in good things after bad things, to trust that tomorrow can be better than yesterday." Amy was crying, happy tears streaming down her face. You showed me what it means to be loved exactly as I am. Not who someone thinks I should be, but who I actually am. Robert felt those words like a physical thing. She was talking about Tom, but he heard the echo of his own failure in them. He'd never loved his sister exactly as she was. He'd loved his idea of protecting her more than he'd loved trusting her. At the reception, Robert stayed at his table during most of the dancing and celebrating. He didn't want to insert himself too much, didn't want to make the day about him in any way. But as the evening wore on, Amy found him. "Dance with me?" she asked, extending her hand. They moved to the dance floor, and as they swayed to the music, Amy spoke quietly. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for this past 6 months. For not pushing, for giving me space, for actually changing instead of just saying you would. You deserved better from me. You always did. We're going to be okay, you know. You and me. It's going to take more time, but we're going to find our way back." Robert nodded, not trusting his voice. "I need you to know something," Amy continued. "What you did hurt, but it also taught me something important. It taught me that I can trust my own judgment, that I don't need anyone's approval to know what's right for me. In a weird way, your doubt made me more sure. I'm glad something good came from it. Something good came from all of it. You're different now. Better. More human, if that makes sense." The song ended and Amy hugged him tight. "I love you, big brother. Even when you're an idiot." Robert laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "I love you too." Later that night, as the reception wound down, Tom approached Robert. They stood together watching Amy dance with their mother, both women laughing about something. "Thank you for being here," Tom said. "Thank you for loving my sister, and for being patient with me when I didn't deserve it." Tom shrugged. "We all make mistakes when we're scared of losing someone we love. The difference is whether we learn from them or double down on them." They shook hands, and this time Robert didn't look for hidden meanings or red flags. He just saw a good man who made his sister happy. Finally, he saw what had been there all along. Driving home that night, Robert thought about the past year. About how certainty had nearly cost him everything. About how being wrong had taught him more than being right ever had. About how the day his judgment failed him turned out to be the day he finally learned what really mattered. He'd spent his whole life being the smartest person in the room. But intelligence without humility was just arrogance. Confidence without doubt was just blindness. And being right about everything meant nothing if you were wrong about the things that actually counted. Robert pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the stars. He wasn't the fortune teller anymore. He wasn't the person everyone turned to for answers. He was just Robert, someone who'd failed and learned and grown and was slowly becoming someone better. And for the first time in his life, that was enough.